You're listening to Little Green Cheese, Season 2, Episode 2. Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm Gavin Weber, and this podcast is where you can learn about cheese making at home. Well, after last episode, I got so many voicemails and so many questions, I've been kind of overwhelmed, and I've had to do a little bit of research because some of the questions were a little bit out of my league as a home cheese maker, but I have found some answers. So that's good news. Now, what I'm going to talk about just on the first part of the show is about an article from, and I found it today, Business Insider Australia. And the headline is called 7 Mistakes Everybody Makes with Cheese. So I'll just go through them. And these are some things, I knew all of them, which was a good thing. But I don't know how many cheesemakers or new cheesemakers out there may know these things. So let's talk about the mistakes. So mistake number 1 is wrapping cheese in plastic wrap. And by plastic wrap, it's better known here in Australia as cling wrap. I think it might be just a brand name or something like that. But what cheese needs, it needs to breathe, and plastic wrap makes the cheese sweat. So unwanted molds will grow on the cheese if it's wrapped too tightly. Also stops the cheese from breathing out any of those off odours like ammonia, which is sometimes produced, especially when you're making mold-ripened cheeses like Camembert, Brie, and some of the blues as well. So don't wrap your cheese in plastic wrap. The best way you could do it is wrap it up in wax paper when you're finished with your cheese, if you haven't eaten the whole thing, and pop it back in the fridge. You can get specialised cheese wrap, which is the sort of stuff you see Camembert wrapped in from the shops. So you can use that as well. But parchment or waxed paper is the best. I tend to use baking paper, which is kind of the same sort of thing. And I wrap my bits of cheese up in that if I haven't completely finished them. If it's like a whole wheel or something like that, what I'll do is I'll vac pack the whole wheel once it's matured and then pop that in the fridge, and it'll continue to mature. That's not plastic wrap per se. Plastic wrap is loosely strung usually over a plate or something like that. All right, the next mistake that people make is throwing out cheese with mold on it. Now, I don't know how many times I've seen people throw out cheese with a little bit of white or blue mold on it. Sometimes the blue goes to green. And look, these are acceptable molds. We use these in cheese making all the time. The white mold will be Penicillium candidum, and the blue mold will be Penicillium roqueforti. So all you have to do is basically cut those bits off, and the cheese is fine. However, having said that, whey type cheese like ricotta, mold can grow from the inside, so I wouldn't eat moldy ricotta, that's for sure. Mistake number 3 is that lactose intolerant people can't eat cheese. Well, I know that for a fact that they can. It's true in soft cheeses where there is still a lot of lactose. However, if you look at hard cheeses and aged hard cheeses, especially like Parmesan Romano, those sorts of cheeses have been aged for a long time. A lot of the lactose has been converted to lactic acid, so therefore people won't be allergic to that. So that gives the sourness in the cheese. So that lactose is not present. And mistake number 4 is not serving cheese at room temperature. Before I learnt how to make cheese, I certainly didn't know about this one. I'd pull it straight out of the fridge and start chomping on it. But if you put your cheese on a platter and you I leave it for about 20 minutes. It usually reaches room temperature after about 20 minutes. And the flavour is just amazing. It really does enhance the flavours and the aromas of your cheese. So make sure that when you get a cheese plate out or bits of cheese straight out of the fridge, make sure they rest until they come to room temperature. So that is a good tip. Now, mistake number 5, keeping all cheeses in the fridge. And well, not all cheeses have to be left in the fridge. You look at, for instance, Parmesan doesn't have to be left in the fridge. However, here in Australia, when it gets really hot in summer, Parmesan starts to sweat the oils, and you really don't need that. So that's not a good thing. So Parmesans shouldn't be left in the heat like here in Australia. Like if it gets to like 36 degrees Celsius, you can imagine that the Parmesan will start sweating. But normally in our winter, you can leave it at room temperature. So that's okay for some hard cheeses, but I certainly wouldn't do that for any soft cheeses. I wouldn't leave those out at all. I'd keep most of those in the refrigerator. Mistake number 6 is that you assume that all cheeses have equal shelf lives. Well, we know that not to be true from the last statement, because each cheese has a different maturation period. So the longer the cheese takes to mature, the longer its shelf life. And softer cheeses have a very short shelf life. Try saying that quickly. So, for instance, look at homemade quick mozzarella. I would only put a shelf life on it in the fridge anyway for about 5 days because it starts to go runny and flat. Same goes for ricotta. I wouldn't eat that past about 7 days, so I would eat that pretty quick. But if you're not sure, then do a little bit of research. The harder the cheese, the longer it's going to last in the fridge, if you just have it in a normal packet that you've bought. But if you've made it yourself, obviously you're going to make sure that's still in the wax or still vac packed, and that'll last a lot longer. And mistake number 7 is not trying different cheeses within a cheese family. And I've got a story about this. When I first met Kim, my wife, she didn't like blue cheese. She must have had a bad experience with a really tart blue cheese. And she was also a smoker at the time. And after she stopped smoking, which was about 2 years after I met her, I brought out some blue cheese because, I like it. And it was a fairly mild blue cheese. It wasn't really strong. It was, I think it was a Castello Blue, which is a Danish blue cheese. Very mild. It's not very strong. It's not like, for instance, here in Australia we have a dairy called King Island Dairies. They make a blue cheese called Roaring 40s. That's quite strong. And some of your English Stiltons, and certainly the Stilton that I make is a very strong blue cheese. However, she tried some of this and she liked it, which was great. And then I introduced her into the stronger type blue cheeses and she hasn't looked back. So just because you've tried one cheese of that type and it hasn't been a nice experience, then try another. Because there are, especially with the mold ripened cheeses and a lot of aged cheeses, you will find that they vary in taste. For instance, you look at cheddars. You can get a mild cheddar, which has only been matured for, say, 3 months, maybe 4 months, all the way up to a vintage cheddar, which may have been matured for over 2 years. And the contrast in flavour and aroma is chalk and cheese. Pardon the pun. But you can see, so if you don't like a full-blown blue, obviously try something a little bit milder, like a Castello or a Camembert, which you can make yourself, which is a combination of a Camembert and a Gorgonzola. So there are 7 mistakes everybody makes with cheese. I dare say a lot of you out there listening to the podcast do not, and probably know this anyway. But my favourite is never throw away a mouldy cheese, just cut the bit off. And I certainly do that, and I am still alive, and it actually produces healthy flora in the intestinal system. Well, that's what I tell people anyway. So we've got lots of listener questions in the form of voicemails, and I've got swags of emails as well. And a swag, by the way, is a lot. It's an Australian colloquial term, a bit like Stone the Crows, that sort of thing. Now, before I do that, I've got an announcement from my friend Ian in Canada. He lives in, where does he live? He lives in Alberta. He's just asked me to promote a Canadian cheese-making competition. Now, I know a lot of Canadians listen to the podcast, so I'm just going to read this out for him. Competition in the works for amateur cheesemakers. The cheese lovers who organise the Great Canadian Cheese Festival every June are planning to host the first ever Canadian amateur cheesemaking competition, possibly expanding the contest to include home cheesemakers in the US. The mission is to recognise and honour the best in amateur cheesemaking and to provide encouragement and feedback to home cheesemakers. Would you be interested in entering your cheese for judging? You won't personally have to be present to participate, as you can safely ship cheese in a cooled box. Please indicate your interest by emailing Ian Trower, it's spelled Treuer, and the email address is competition@cheesefestival.ca. Ian, who blogs about his adventures as a home cheesemaker, is acting as competition coordinator. Check out Much To Do About Cheese at www.muchtodooaboutcheese.com. Awards will be presented for best in each cheese division. Judging reports will be issued for each cheese entered. The first amateur competition will take place this June 6th to 7th in conjunction with the 5th anniversary Great Canadian Cheese Festival in Picton, Ontario, 2 hours east of Toronto, 3 hours north of Syracuse, New York. And the website for the festival is www.cheesefestival.ca. So that sounds pretty exciting. So all of you Canadians and people in the US, Americans, have a go. Have a look at the site and see what cheeses you could possibly enter into the competition. So thanks, Ian, for bringing that to my attention. Happy to read it out. I do have lots of readers and listeners in the US and Canada. So that sounds very exciting. I wish I lived a little bit closer. I could have a go as well. So on to the first voicemail. This one's from Lorraine.
This is Lorraine McLaughlin in Shepherdsville, Kentucky, United States. I'm a real greenhorn to cheese making, and I just finished making a Parmesan cheese, planning to put it in my basement to age, but I don't have any way to increase the humidity. It's only at 65 right now, and I need 85. Any answers for me? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lorraine. Yes, I do have an answer. It's called a ripening box. You can get plastic, I don't know if it's Tupperware or what have you over there, and they have a little red button on top, and you can open that and let a bit of the humidity out. But you will be able to get your cheese up to between 80 and sometimes 90% relative humidity if you use a cheese ripening box. And in fact, I think Ricky Carroll's site, cheesemaking.com, has those for sale. So you might just want to pop over there and have a look. Hope that helps, and hope your basement is a lovely place for ripening your cheese. So on to the next one. This one's from Ellie May in New Zealand.
Just want to know why it is when you make feta cheese and you put it in a saline solution for 2 to 3 weeks or more, it gets very sloppy and you can no longer hold it as cheese because it's so, I don't know, like an osmotic effect really. I just wondered about the pH, if the pH was right. So I would really appreciate a call if you get this message. First time I've done this, and it's Eleanor speaking, or Ellie May. So thank you. Bye now. I love your website. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much for your question, Ellie May. Now, I have replied back to Ellie May because she asked me in an email as well. Now, what I do is I add a very special ingredient, or 2 very special ingredients to my brine that stops that sloppiness. And that sloppiness is caused by the calcium trying to get into the salt. So it's reverse osmosis, and it makes the cheese go sloppy as the salt is trying to penetrate into the curds or the cheese that you've made. So what I do is I boil up about 2 litres of water, or that's nearly 2 quarts, and I add depends how salty I want the brine, between 1/3 of a cup and 1/2 a cup of non-iodized cheese salt. Then I add 2 tablespoons of white vinegar and then a teaspoon of calcium chloride. and then I let that cool, and then I submerge the cheese into it, and usually it floats to the top. You know you've got enough salt in your brine when the cheese floats to the top. You also know if you've got too much salt in your brine if the salt doesn't absorb and it sits on the bottom, so you've got too much in there. So there's just a couple of hints for brine. Now I find that by adding the vinegar and the calcium chloride, it stops the calcium from leaching back into the brine. The calcium chloride adds extra calcium, so you don't get that leaching effect. And the little bit of vinegar that we put into the brine solution helps harden the outer layer of the cheese. So that works really well. I've never had any issues using that type of brine solution, and certainly since I've been doing, I've never had a slimy cheese, whereas I used to have before I started adding those two ingredients. So, Ellie Mae, I hope that helped out, and I hope that's helped out some other people out there listening. So the next one is from Ephraim, and I'll just play it.
Hello Gavin, I'm trying to make some cream cheese, and I have the main ingredient, which is milk, but I have no idea where to buy the other two ingredients from. I mean, I've looked on Google and I found a few places that sell the two ingredients, but there are a huge variety of the two ingredients and I have no idea which one to buy. I would also pronounce them, but I'm not from UK and it's really hard for me to pronounce. So can you please point me onto a website where I can buy the two ingredients from? Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks for your voicemail, Ephraim. The only trouble is I don't know what country you come from, and I can't tell from your email address where you come from, so I can research and track down a cheese making supplier for you. So if you can just drop me back a line or send me back an email to gavin@littlegreencheese.com, then I'll be happy to point you in the right direction. Now, those two ingredients are rennet, liquid rennet in this case for soft cream cheese, and the other one was a mesophilic culture. And if I remember rightly, I used a Sacco culture called MO36R, which is a low acidifying culture. I don't have what the culture types are in front of me here off the top of my head, but it's not as strong as, say, MO30, which is also by Sacco, which converts a lot of the lactose to lactic acid. So MO36R is used for soft cheeses like cream cheese. So Ephraim, just send me an email and I'll track down a cheese supplier in your area that may ship to the country you're in. Sorry I can't help you out any further than that. Okay, on to the next question. This one's from David. And David's my buddy from Canada.
Hello, Gavin. This is David here in Canada. I'm just sort of experimenting with your voicemail system here. And I think I tried it once before and it was too difficult for me, but I think you've made it a lot easier. And so anyway, I congratulate you on your new mozzarella video. It's very nice, very good. I've been asked to do a workshop on cheese making, and maybe I'll follow your instructions for that. The reason for calling is to give you a question for your podcast. I was wondering if one made cheese 2 days in a row, and after the first day of making cheese one had a lot of whey left over, and then so one made ricotta with the whey, and then the second day when one made cheese, one mixed the day before's ricotta in with the curds at the sort of milling stage, for example, and milled it all together and salted it all down and put it in the press and made one cheese. And then in this way, of course, you would get the maximum out of your milk. You wouldn't be throwing away the whey with anything in it, which is what usually happens. I tried this once myself a few years ago, and I did them both on the same day, and it didn't work out too well because I think the proper cheese had cooled down a bit, and by the time I got the ricotta made, and the two didn't really mix in very well together, and it made a very crumbly cheese. So just be interesting to get your views on this. Well, otherwise, always interesting in your podcasts and your videos. Keep up the good work. Bye for now.
Well, thanks, David. I really appreciate your voicemail. And by the way, the cheese harps that you've made me, or cheese cutters, are still going strong. And every time I use it, I think of you, mate. So now you can catch David. He was in one of the earlier podcasts. I think it was about episode 4 or 5. So David appeared in episode 5 of the Little Green Cheese podcast. So you can go and check him out there. So David, to answer your question, I don't think I would actually add the ricotta into the curds from the next day. They go really dry, and they probably wouldn't knit with the curds anyway. What I have made in the past is ricotta salata, which is you form the ricotta into a mold and you press it for a couple of hours, just lightly, probably, I think it was about 10 pounds, which is about 5 kilos. So I pressed it. But before I pressed it, I salted it, about a teaspoon of salt for the ricotta I made out of the 6 litres of whey I had, and it makes a very nice cheese. Ricotta salata is what it's called. Like I said, I wouldn't add the ricotta to the cheese the next day. I'd just make a separate cheese ricotta salata. So hopefully that's answered your question, and thanks for calling in, mate. I know sometimes using SpeakPipe is a little bit difficult, but glad you persevered and sent it through. So the next voicemail is from Amrith, and I'm not sure where Amrith is from, but we'll play it. It's a very interesting question. This is the one I had to do about 2 hours of research on to get the answer for him. So I hope you value this. I was very curious myself, and I'd kind of understood what it was about, but let's talk about it. We're going to be talking about international milk clotting or coagulation units, or IMCU.
Hi Gavin, this is Amrit speaking to you from Durban in South Africa. I recently purchased your book Keep Calm and Make Cheese, and I'm totally inspired to make the cheese. So I just recently got most of the ingredients that I may require, but in your videos and also in your recipes you use liquid rennet. I was only able to get the powdered one. It's the Cheesemaker's powder extra NB, and it says usage 30 to 60 international milk coagulation units per liter of milk. Please could you help me make this into liquid rennet? I'm not sure how to get it converted. It says the activity is 2,235 IMCU per gram. Now I've tried checking on the internet how to change this over to liquid rennet. What quantity of teaspoon or gram per liter of water would I be using? Please, Gavin, if you wouldn't mind, if you can help me work this out. It's the Cheesemaker's powder extra NB. It's made by CHR Hansen. Thank you very much.
No problems at all, Amrith. That research I did. Now, here we go. Hopefully this translates well in a podcast, but we'll see how you go. Now, International Milk Coagulation Unit or Clotting Unit was a standard. It's an ISO standard, and all dairies that make cheese use it if they're going to use commercial quantities of milk. So the powder you've got is Cymax, and I actually use a liquid form of Cymax, and just out of interest, it is rated at 190 IMCU. So that is a lot weaker dose than what you have. Now, you mentioned that the Cymax powder that you have is 2,235 IMCU per gram. Now, that is quite a strong rennet, and it's equivalent. Basically, I have a rennet tablet on my online store. It's from A's 50 rennet tablets. Now they each tablet is about an eighth of a gram. Oh, sorry, not an eighth. 0.8 grams. So 8/10 of a gram. So that coagulates 50 litres of milk. It's very similar IMCU to the powder that you have as well. You don't say if it's in tablet form or it's just loose powder, but I'll assume it's loose powder because it sounds like it's used for commercial dairies. So what you can do is there's a very rough formula, and I've sent this through to you in email anyway. And what you do is it takes 36.6 millilitres per litre at 1 IMCU. So what you would have to do to figure out how many grams you would need for 10 litres of milk, I'll just do a basic formula here. So it's 36.3 divided by the IMCU of your powder. In this case, it's 2,235. So that equals 0.0164 grams per litre of milk. So for 10 litres of milk, if you're going to inoculate that, it's going to be 0.16 grams. So that's not very, so you're going to have to get a very fine scale, or you're going to have to figure out how many teaspoons or half teaspoons or eighth of a teaspoon that much rennet is. And I don't have a scale to help you out. However, with the tablets that I use, as I mentioned, they're actually scored so you can snap them into quarters. So a quarter of one of those tablets, and the total tablet, as I said, weighs 0.8 grams or 8/10 of a gram. A quarter of the tablet can set 12.5 litres of milk at 35 degrees Celsius in 45 minutes. So that's the specifics of those sorts of tablets. So if you can measure out a quarter of a gram, which is 0.25, I would allow for pasteurisation, maybe homogenisation and stuff like that, unless you're using raw milk. So maybe 0.25 of a gram you would use in 12.5 litres. So hopefully that's helped out. So as I said, all you have to do to figure out how many grams per litre or how many millilitres per litre, if you're using liquid rennet, it's the same calculation. It's 36.3 divided by how many IMCU, and that'll tell you how many grams or millilitres per litre of milk you need to use with that rennet. Now, all rennets come in different strengths, so just make sure you check the IMCU, and it usually also tells you how many millilitres or how many grams, if it's a powder, to use per 10 litres. Most cheese-making suppliers will say that. What I use for my 190, which is very close to 200 IMCU, the liquid rennet that I supply, is that I recommend 2 millilitres per 10 litres. So I use just under that if I'm using 8 litres of milk, which is my standard batch in my cheese-making book. But thanks very much for your question, Amrith. I really appreciate it. I had to do a lot of research for that one, and it really made it a lot clearer about rennet strengths and various rennet strengths. Vegetarian rennets tend to be on the weaker side, and animal rennets tend to be on the stronger side. But those powdered rennets, usually used in commercial dairies, they are very strong indeed. Anyway, one last voicemail, and this one's from Colin. We had Colin in the last show asking about plastic mats.
Hi Gavin, thanks for the effort you made in finding my cheese mats. I shall do that, send for those. Hey look, I'll be sending you some photos very soon of some of the cheeses that I am making. They include Camembert, my favourite, Gouda, cream cheese, Emmental, Leicester, halloumi, Parmesan, ricotta and Swiss. I have some cheeses yet to make, and mostly because of watching your sites, I'm going to have a go at the Caerphilly, Romano, Wensleydale and the Pepperjack. But all the best, mate. Thanks very much. We'll be in touch. Bye.
Well, thanks for that lovely voicemail, Colin. Really appreciate it. Now, mate, you've made so many cheeses there. I am thinking about contacting you to see if you'll come on the show as a guest, just like I used to in the first series, the start of the first series, where I had lots of home cheesemakers. I kind of run out. I couldn't find many more, but you sound like you've got a little bit of experience under your belt there, Colin. So expect a voicemail back or a email from me, and we'll see if we can set up a time for an interview in a future show. That would be fantastic. I didn't get those pictures if you've sent them through, so if you could, be lovely if you could send some through, and I'll pop them up on the blog. People love that sort of thing, to see how other home cheese makers enable their craft. It's lovely to share, that's for sure. Now, we're going quite long on the show, so what I'm going to do is I am going to record a second show this week. I have about 10, about 10 emails that I need to get through. Now, if I read those out, I would be here for at least another 40 minutes because some of the questions are quite complex. So what I'm going to do is I am going to record another episode this week, and I'll release it next Monday night. So we'll have, instead of one a fortnight, we'll have one in a week. So that'll be good. So all you curd nerds out there are chaffing the bit. If you've got any more voicemail questions or any email questions in the meantime, don't hesitate to send them through. Always happy. I try and answer them straight away if I can, if I'm not too busy doing all the other stuff that I do on the other couple of podcasts that I run. So just bear with me if I haven't answered your question. I will answer it on a show, or I will answer it directly back. It does make the show flow a lot easier if it's a voicemail. Don't be shy. I'll pop up the SpeakPipe widget onto the show notes again. Don't be scared to use that. That certainly makes my job in answering your questions a lot faster and a lot easier here on the show. And you won't have to stumble through my Aussie accent when I make mistakes and mispronounce people's names and things like that. But anyway, that's a wrap for this show. As I said, I'll produce another one this week, and I'll release that next Monday night. And thanks, everybody, for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the questions, and I hope you enjoyed the answers and the rest of the show. Finally, before I go, don't forget that I now sell cheese equipment and cheese kits over on my e-commerce store. It's www.littlegreenworkshops.com.au. Unfortunately, I only ship to Australia because I don't want the cultures and the rennets and the moulds to spoil in transport. So, as I said, www.littlegreenworkshops.com.au. Now, I'm still blogging over at littlegreencheese.com and posting all the podcasts over there. So you can get all that information over on littlegreencheese.com. You've been listening to Little Green Cheese. You can find my ebook, Keep Calm and Make Cheese, The Beginner's Guide to Cheese Making at Home, and it's available in all ebook formats over at littlegreencheese.com. You can also find my cheese making video tutorials. I just released a quick mozzarella, as hinted by David, and you can go find that over on my YouTube channel. There's a link through on the blog. Thanks for listening, curd nerds, and stay tuned for the next episode of the Little Green Cheese podcast. During this podcast, you heard royalty-free music by Kevin MacLeod. I played Malt Shop Bop and Call to the Dairy Cows.